Look, I'll just begin just in the, it's been one of those weeks. We found out today that June 2022 was the hottest June in human history. Uh, we've got, as we speak, truly epic heat waves going on in China, across much of the American South, heading into the Southwest, and across Europe. England is the place that's been keeping temperature records longer than any place on Earth. It looks like next Tuesday is almost certainly going to be the hottest day in the history of Britain. So, hold on to your hats. At the same time, this week, I just wrote a little piece about the fact that this week the new bids came in for contracts for providing renewable energy in the UK, which does this big bidding process every year. And as usual, the price went down for renewable energy even faster than people had thought it would. They're now booking big commitments to build offshore wind in the UK at 1/4 the price of burning natural gas to produce electricity. What that means is that we're at a place where there's no technological or really economic obstacle anymore to doing what needs to be done. There's only the obstacle that we've always run up against and that we've fought so hard against, and that's the obstacle of vested interest. And so that's been most of our work for a very long time, and it's bearing fruit. We're getting closer. The political power of the fossil fuel industry, say in Washington, now rests on the shoulders of just one person, Joe Manchin. But it turns out that one person who they've given more money to than anybody else in DC is the critical vote. And we can't get past, we've never passed serious climate legislation in Washington, and we may not get it done this year either, thanks to Mr. Manchin. So all I'm telling you is stuff you already know. We're in a huge race. We don't know what the outcome of that race is going to be. We're obviously not going to stop global warming, but we retain within us the power to stop it short of where it just cuts civilization off at the knees. That's our job. It depends on our ability to weaken the fossil fuel industry enough that they're no longer able to game the system and keep change from coming. We will try. We will try together. You guys have done your part in so many ways, and I know you'll keep at it. And California, of course, is absolutely central to this fight because it's the one big economy in North America that's really trying with everything, with at least a lot of what it has to move, to make change, to get things going. And the reason that that's happening is because you've been pushing this system and demonstrating that even a fairly small number of people can make big change happen when they work together. So I could not be more grateful. We're all incredibly grateful, and we're all primed for the next rounds in this fight. So maybe that's what we should talk about. But whatever questions you've got, Masada, I'm ready to go. Do your best. Questions, critique, abuse, whatever you would like. I'm
Awesome.
ready for.
Thank you. Yeah, well, first we're starting with questions that were put together by San Diego 350 and NCCCA ahead of time, which are going to be asked by Paloma, who just introduced herself. And then we're going to move to some questions from the audience. Yeah, Paloma, take it away.
Thank you, Masala, for that. And thank you, Bill, for being here. The first question that I have for you is, you recognize the importance of fighting the political power and influence of the fossil fuel industry head on and early on. How successful do you think the movement has been in countering the fossil fuel industry and its misinformation efforts? And what do you think we need to do to succeed?
Well, so First of all, Paloma, very good to meet you. And uh, uh, so it's the key question. We've been pretty successful. I mean, one of the things that's happened over the last 10 years that's a out and out victory for the climate movement is that we have substantially shifted the zeitgeist here. People's sense of what's normal and natural and obvious, what they want. The polling data is now clear. 70% or more of Americans want government action on climate change. They understand that it's a threat, and that is a big change from a decade ago. Two things have caused that to happen. One is that the work of people like you in every corner of the country and around the world. We've built movements. Those movements have been relentless. They have educated. They have pushed. The other thing that's happened is sadder. It's that Mother Nature is now doing her best to reinforce that message all the time. And at a certain point, enough fires, floods, droughts, who are you going to believe? Fox News or your own lying eyes. And so that's shifted things in dramatic ways. And we have definitely weakened the power of the fossil fuel industry. A decade ago, the fossil fuel industry was still the most important industry in the world. Exxon in 2013 was still the biggest company on earth. That's no longer true. They're having a banner year this year because of the war in Ukraine. They're making lots of money, lots of windfall profits, but basically they've been the lowest performing part of the economy for the last decade. And there's every reason to think that that will continue because the renewable energy industry is eating their lunch in terms of providing the same service at a cheaper cost, but also because we've harried and harassed them relentlessly at every turn. The divestment campaigns being the clearest example. That's now become the largest anti-corporate campaign in history. We're at $40 trillion now in endowments and portfolios and pension funds that have divested. And we're counting on you all as soon as possible to get the California pension funds divested. It was a sadness last week when Assemblyman Cooper was able to kill the bill that had gotten through the state Senate. But we're not there yet. They retain enormous power. The fossil fuel industry, in the person really of the Koch brothers more than anybody else, purchased the Republican Party some years ago. They're a wholly owned subsidiary when it comes to energy issues. There's not the slightest chance of getting anybody on the Republican side of the aisle to do the right thing on these questions. And they have just enough sway left in the Democratic Party to keep things from shifting. It's close, though, way closer than it's ever been. I mean, in 2009, the last time Congress took this up, it didn't even come to a vote in the Senate because everybody knew that at best there were 37 or 38 senators who would back even the modest cap and trade proposals. Now we've got, looks like a pretty solid 49, but 49 doesn't quite get you across the finish line. And it's Joe Manchin who's taken the most money from the fossil fuel industry that stands in the way. So the job of weakening those guys remains highly important. I think that the most important way to do that right now, the most likely way, is to continue to put big pressure on the financial institutions that continue to support the fossil fuel industry. I think the banks, the investment asset managers, and the insurance companies are relatively soft targets to go after. And that's why we're doing this huge, big campaign at Third Act, where I'm spending most of my volunteer time now trying to take on the banks we're going to have lots of people cutting up their credit cards and so on by year's end to kind of launch this work and really push hard on these guys. We got to keep coming after them from everywhere we can and weakening their ability to hold up progress. I mean, the horror of the climate fight is it's always been that this is what it's always been. I mean, we won the argument 30 years ago. We've known what sets of policies were required. We just haven't been able to do them because vested interest has been in the way. And so thanks to you all, we've been chipping away at vested interest as best we can. And we're a lot closer than we've been, but not close enough.
Thank you, Bill. How do we ensure that the economic and health benefits of technologies for solar, wind, electrification, and battery storage for everyone, especially for people in environmental justice committees who have limited access, yet have borne the majority of the harmful impacts of the fossil fuel industry? Do you have any success stories that you can share?
Well, I mean, happily, the EJ discussion around climate change has come a long ways in the last 10 years. And so more and more and more, we're having, when people manage to get legislation through, it's getting much better at targeting money and regulations at the communities that need them most. It's not easy work because obviously American politics is set up in the opposite direction to target things to the most powerful people, but with a lot of hard work that's shifted. So for instance, the Green New Deal that became Build Back Better, that's been, continually shrunk by Senator Manchin for the last year, still has in it real effort at directing large part of the resources it would provide to underserved and vulnerable communities. And that's a big change from federal legislation in the past and makes it really important. And some of that's shown up in other places too. New York State's landmark climate law, the CLCPA, I can never remember what the acronym stands for, but it targets a large percentage of resources at underserved communities throughout the state. And it was really won in New York State by environmental justice groups. You all know better than I do the state of play in everything that's going on in California. But my impression from a distance is that much the same has been happening there. I've been a kind of part of these efforts, that we were calling Brown's Last Chance, and then on to Newsom and whatever else to shift things around fossil fuel production in the state. And a lot of that work was led by wonderful environmental justice groups. I'm thinking of people like Committee on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, and people like Juan Flores, and just people I admire and love working with. So I think we're getting, given all that we know about American history and how power is distributed and where it lies and stuff, we're closer than we've been before. But there's no easy shortcut here except to just keep pushing and make sure that as we do this work, that's close to the top of our minds. I'll just add that it's become clearer than ever. I'll add two things. One, it's become clearer than ever just how key getting off fossil fuels in general is for the public health of people, especially the poorest and most vulnerable people. We never really had good numbers until last year, but now we do. The first big meta study from around the world showed us that, forget about climate change, 9 million people a year on this planet die from breathing the combustion byproducts of burning coal and oil and gas, mostly particulates. 9 million people turns out to be a lot of people. It's almost 1 death in 5 on this planet. It's more than COVID. It's more than HIV/AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, war, and terrorism combined. And it's all unnecessary now. That's the thing that makes it so frustrating. I mean, the vaccine for dying from breathing particulates, the vaccine's called electric bikes and electric buses and electric cars. It's called air source heat pumps and solar panels and wind turbines. It's called all this technology that's now cheap and should be deployable around the world. And if we did deploy it fast, we would be saving millions upon millions of people a year, and they'd be the poorest and most vulnerable people because everybody knows who gets to live next to the highway, who gets to live next to the refinery, who gets to live next to the power plant. Okay. And the second thing about justice that we always have to remind ourselves is that there is injustice within our own country and our own communities, but the even larger level of injustice is what happens around the world in this fight. And I mean, they don't call it global warming for nothing. I hear people saying that I'm not talking loudly enough. I'm doing my best, but if you have trouble, I'm very sorry. And turn your volume all the way up, and I will turn my volume up as best I can. This may just be my, I may just have given too many talks. Right now, climate change is hitting most profoundly the African continent, and in Somalia, in the Horn of Africa right now, we've missed 5 straight rainy seasons with no rain. And so people are dying in extraordinary numbers. And the pictures that come back look like those pictures, Paloma, you're too young for this, but from the Biafran War in the 1970s, just of starving babies with swollen bellies and things. It's unbearable to look at and to think about, but we have to think about it. The entire continent of Africa has produced 2% of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The level of unfairness that represents is just so unbelievable. And so just know, I mean, we have lots of colleagues in Africa who are doing incredible work. Masada knows some of them, Landrine and Tereste,
as high as I can get.
Vanessa Nakate, and on and on and on. They watch what y'all are doing. They know what y'all are doing. They feel empowered by it. And you need to know what they're doing and feel roused by it. This really is a global fight, and justice is very much at its heart.
Thank you, Bill, for all of that information. And yes, I will definitely be looking at it. And I know a lot of folks who are always more than willing to educate. And that is amazing. The next question that I have for you, and just a reminder, we do have limited time today. So if you could try to keep it a little bit shorter when you answer this next question, that would be amazing. So California led the nation decades ago by establishing net metering, the program that spurred the use of rooftop solar across the state and the country. How is it possible that the Public Utilities Commission is seriously considered to kill this successful program, and with it, rooftop solar? Do you have any ideas how we fight this effort by the monopoly utilities, including SDG&E, here in San Diego?
You tell me how this happened. I don't understand the politics that leads to this. It seems insane to me. This is one of the places, as you point out, that California should be taking great pride in. I don't know enough about California politics to know exactly what you should be doing to intervene, except that it's becoming pretty obvious that Gavin Newsom wants to run for president. And so that's good. That means that he has to build those. The last thing he can afford is having a lot of Californians mad at him about not being good on climate change and energy, because he's obviously, if he runs for president, that's what he's going to run on. So it's the great moment to be reaching out to Gavin Newsom and saying, we need you to be the absolute champion here. I know that's what people did with this solar rooftop stuff. And I guess at worst, it's still in some kind of limbo at the moment or something. But that's the perfect example of a fight that he can't afford to give up on if he's serious about running for president. People should remember that during the last Democratic primaries, climate change emerged as the biggest issue in the primaries. And that's the reason that Joe Biden, who'd never shown much interest in climate change, ended up having to adopt basically some form of the Green New Deal in this Build Back Better bill. And we have to make sure that dynamic is at play next time around. So keep the pressure on Newsom and make it probably best to make it, in this case, friendly pressure. We can't wait to support you, but you got to do it. You got to make sure that you're running on a clean slate.
I completely agree, Bill. Thank you for that. Some of us would say that our political system is broken, with a Congress incapable of getting anything done and a politicized and partisan Supreme Court, right? And that our inability to solve the climate crisis is just one of the casualties of that failure. Do you agree? And if that is true, how should it shape our climate activism and strategy?
Well, I think this is the $64 question, Paloma, so two answers. One, yes, it's obviously broken. We can't get anything done. And when we try to do anything, the Supreme Court gets in the way. These last three Supreme Court decisions on guns, on choice, and on the Clean Air Act and the EPA were, from my point of view, horrendous and partisan decisions. The only blessing is they were also incredibly unpopular decisions. Each, I don't mean like 51-49 unpopular, I mean 70-30 unpopular. And so if the Democrats in particular could get it together, there's an opportunity to run in a way that they haven't in a very long time. I wrote a piece right after the Supreme Court decisions saying Joe Biden should get on the train that he likes and just head out across the country for the next 100 days doing nothing but tell people, rallying people around these decisions. There's a reasonable chance, even in the horrible environment we're in at the moment, political environment with the inflation and whatever else, that we could end up with 52 or 53 senators out of this election. And if we did, then Joe Manchin becomes irrelevant. The problem is we also have to hold the House to have that mean anything. So we need to be out working hard, campaigning hard, and hoping that we can get something done in November. But realistically, we better not put all our eggs in that basket either. I think it's super important that we keep remembering that there are two power centers in our country large enough to matter. One of them is called Washington, and the other is called Wall Street. And we need to be pushing Wall Street just as hard as we are Washington. And one of the reasons why that tactic is important is just, if you think about it strategically, our political system is gamed so that most of the power ends up in the red parts of the country. Californians know better than anybody else. You guys get the same number of senators as Wyoming, okay? So the deck is stacked. It's hard to make progress. On the other hand, most of the money is in the blue parts of the country. 65% of the GDP is in counties that voted for Biden. And we can use that to push the financial system in serious ways. Most of the money's in New York, in San Francisco, LA, in Chicago, in London, in Frankfurt, in Tokyo. These are places where we can still push, even as it's become very difficult to push politically, not just in the US, but in Brazil, in China, in India, in Russia, and other places that are becoming more totalitarian and difficult to work. So these are the two main marching orders, it seems to me.
Thank you for that, Bill. And yes, you have mentioned the Biden's Build Back Better bill. Given the failure of it, which was not even like a strong enough bill, should then our climate groups be more focused on electing and re-electing the climate champions that we were talking about earlier, or increasing our Democratic majority in Congress? Or do you have any other ideas maybe that we could be doing aside from the ones you already mentioned?
Working in the political system is endlessly frustrating. It never works as well as it should, even when it's working. And truly, it's pretty dysfunctional now. I think we have no choice but to keep trying. Among other things, one way to look at it is we're going to deal with a lot of, even in the best of situations, it's going to be a difficult next few decades because the climate is changing fast already. And even if we do everything right from this point, there's going to be a lot of trauma and difficulty. In that kind of world, we want to have as kind and humane a government as it's possible to have. So even sort of climate legislation aside, it makes a lot of sense to try to elect governments that at least don't go out of their way to be cruel to people. And so I think it's worth staying engaged in this system and doing what we can. And I also think it's worth working really hard at the state and local levels where we can make progress. And as I said, follow the money too. Push hard on money and see what happens.
Thank you, Bill. I do have a couple more questions, but I think given the time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Masada so we can get some of these questions from the folks that are here watching. And then we'll be back for another couple of questions. So Masada, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you.
Thank you. Okay, one question we have was from, and pardon me in advance for mispronouncing people's names, Danette or Danette. How can we pressure Biden to declare a climate emergency and use the Defense Production Act to accelerate green energy production?
This is a specialty of mine in the last few months. Right after the 3 days after the invasion of Ukraine, I wrote a piece called Heat Pumps for Peace and Freedom, arguing that, in fact, they should do just that, invoke the Defense Production Act to start building lots and lots of clean energy stuff, heat pumps being the best example. I said, let's send them off to Europe, undercut Putin's ability to strangle Europe by turning off the gas tap, by getting them onto cheap electric heating and cooling. And surprisingly, that piece met with a certain amount of reception. Now, one of our first big projects at Third Act, this group that I've been working to build, that it's not for you guys, because I know that everybody in San Diego is 26 and goes surfing for 3 hours in the afternoon. But this is for old people like me, those of us over the age of 60. One of the first big projects we were pushing was getting people to write letters to the White House just about this heat pumps Defense Production Act thing. And people wrote a lot of letters, and we got some young people doing a lot of work online about it. And in about 90 days, Biden, in fact, signed a thing saying, invoking the Defense Production Act to start building heat pumps and other renewable technology. Now, it doesn't have enough money in it to make a huge difference. And that's the part that Biden can't do by himself. He needs Congress to produce the money that would make this more real. But it's a very good place to be pushing, especially because the war in Ukraine demonstrated vividly the other big cost, along with climate change and public health pollution. Fossil fuel is intimately linked to authoritarianism. And Russia couldn't be invading other small countries if it didn't have 60% of its revenues come from oil and gas. And so one can't wait for the day when we run on sun and wind, and we can tell Vladimir Putin and the King of Saudi Arabia and the Koch brothers and everybody else where to get off,
Thank you. The next question is from Tom in Ventura County. And they say, what do you think about civil disobedience as a tool, and which organizations are doing the best job on it?
Oh, well, civil disobedience, I've got to say, is an important tool. As someone who's spent a fair amount more time in jail than I ever expected to, it's one tool in the activist toolkit. You do not want to use it all the time because, like any tool, it gets dull, both literally and figuratively. But there are moments when it's the right tool to use. We've, of course, been hamstrung in our ability to use it for the last couple of years because of the pandemic. And, we were planning in Earth Day of 2020 to have people in the lobbies of 1,500 banks across America. But we had to call it off because, people in jail are, many of them there unjustly and defenseless. See, the last thing you want to do is bring in a lot of germs from the outside world and get people who are sitting in a jail cell someplace sick. So I think we're only now getting back to the point where people are even considering doing civil disobedience of the kind that would land people in jail. I hope we're able to more and more, because it is an important part of our work. And in the meantime, people who are interested, we're trying to, in lots of places, people are giving good training and trying to train people up. We're going to be doing a series at Third Act just on this question. So tell your parents and grandparents.
Thank you. The next question is from David, and is, could mobilizing the no fossil fuel money pledge, keeping fossil fuel dark money out of politics, be a part of the Third Act?
Oh, it can be a part of all of our work. I mean, Third Act's just one more. It's one more part of this. Yeah, it's a very useful tool. And at this point, I think as of the last presidential primary, most of the presidential candidates were disowning fossil fuel money. I don't think it any longer plays a huge role in Democratic politics. And I think it plays a huge and unassailable role in Republican politics. I don't know quite how to get it out of there, but I think that, when it's there, we should be talking about it as much as we can.
Thanks. Next question is from Susan. Is it important to counteract the marketing of quote unquote net zero and other greenwashing? And how do we best do that?
Yes. So on the one hand, it's very good that people are making all these net zero commitments because it gives us something to hold people to and push them on. And on the other hand, most of them are nonsense. They don't really mean much of anything because no one knows what net zero means, and because the time targets they're talking about are pretty close to meaningless. 2050 is not an interesting number in the climate fight. 2050 is not an interesting date. It's too late to be really talking about in these terms. 2030 is more like it, And so you got to challenge and we are, I've been writing left and right, and, wonderful groups like Fossil Free Media that Jamie Henn is running, others have been doing a great job of countering some of this greenwashing as it emerges. And there'll be more and more and more of that. But I will say that the net zero targets do turn out to be really useful. And I'll tell you a quick story. I just did a long piece for the New Yorker about this new data on banks. Someone finally found a way to really calculate what the carbon impact of cash on hand in the banks is. A group called South Pole Analytics, working for a group called Bank Forward, and this study, the numbers were unbelievable. What they showed was that for the big tech companies, many of them in California that have lots and lots of money, the the carbon that comes from keeping that money in the bank where it's lent out for pipelines and frac wells and stuff way exceeds the carbon impacts of their operations. When you put this new data into the spreadsheet, Google's emissions went up 111%, Apple's up 70%. Netflix generates more carbon from its cash on hand than from all of us sitting on our couches around the world watching bad movies every night. Amazon produces more money, more carbon from its cash than it does from all its warehouses and delivery vans that it owns, on and on and on. And so what's powerful about that is all these guys have made net zero commitments, but they can't keep them if they keep their money in Chase and Citi and Wells Fargo and Bank of America. But they're so big that they can't just go switch to beneficial state or whatever, because they're too big for that. So what we really need now and what we're asking and pushing for is people like Tim Cook at Apple to go sit down with Jamie Dimon at Chase and say, bro, I cannot keep my net zero promise because you're lending all my money out to Exxon to build more crap. So cut it out, And then Chase Bank has to choose not between. We're going to push them hard, and I'm sure they care about my credit card a good deal, but they probably care about Apple's banking business going forward even a little more. So in combination, this may be a powerful way to push. So I'm glad that we have them on the record anyway.
Okay. Next question is from Jack and says, what is the best thing somebody who won't be old enough to vote during the midterms can do to influence the outcome of the elections and fight for climate change?
Yes. Well, in coming up to the elections, Jack, you can phone bank, you can knock on doors, you can be, truthfully, it's much easier now to intervene in elections far away than it ever used to be. So I've just been putting out things today on my Twitter account about how to getting people ready to phone bank or text bank for like Sherry Beasley in North Carolina. I'm not going to go to North Carolina, but I can spend a couple of hours helping out her campaign. And that's a good way to end up with 52 senators, whatever it is. So there's great work going on here. But there's tons of other stuff you can be doing too before you're able to vote. Truthfully, awful lot of the most dynamic climate action around the world in the last 5 years has come from people who are too young to vote. The whole school strike movement, Fridays for the Future movement. And these people are doing a great job also of pushing banks and things. We just did this action with close to home at one of the Chase banks, and we had a big demonstration outside it. And out front, were the big ton of high school students, and they're somewhat sprier, so they were kind of at the front of the march, and at the back was a big crowd of older people with the big banner that said "Fossils Against Fossil Fuels." So together there's a lot of this intergenerational work to be done now, and so I'm pretty sure everyone will dig in, Jack. If you start leading, I bet that lots of people on this call will be only too happy to follow up, and see you outside Chase Bank or Wells Fargo or someplace soon.
Okay. Next question is from Gabriella, and it says, sorry, I lost it. How can we create better coalitions? There are so many small climate organizations and hubs, but many are not coordinating actions with each other.
Well, that's a problem. But it sounds like you guys have that licked there in a lot of ways. Like, I'm really glad tonight that NCCCA and 350 SD and so many others are working together. And I assume that's going on regularly. In a lot of places, that work really is. And it's been wonderful in particular to watch people really falling in behind the EJ groups and working hard with them. The coalition work's been pretty good. Like on this bank stuff, some of us helped form this thing called Stop the Money Pipeline that's got all kinds of groups from small ones down to, up to the Sierra Club, whatever, working together to take on the financial institutions. So this is a place where the environmental movement is way better than it used to be. And the best training ground for that, actually, the place where we really learned to do it was the fight over the Keystone Pipeline, where everybody just fell in and did what they could. And a lot of that's carried over, partly because people figured out that they really liked working together, and that there was, lots of things that small frontline groups could do, lots of things, especially around research and lobbying, that big old established groups could do. There was lots of work for everyone.
Thanks. Next question is from Andrea. How specifically can we pressure Wall Street and the financial interests?
Well, this campaign that I've been describing a little bit that we've got going at Third Act, I think is really useful. We're calling it a Banking on the Future pledge. And so everybody's pledging that they'll cut up their credit cards and maybe try switching their bank accounts at year's end away from those 4 big banks. Pretty good chance you've got a credit card from one of those banks in your wallet. You might not even know it because your United credit card, your Amazon, your Costco credit card, whatever, are linked to Chase or one of the other big ones. Happily, there's now lots of other places you can get credit cards, and Californians are particularly lucky because Beneficial State and others are good fossil-free banks. But don't do this on your own. Probably if you cut up your credit card, Wells Fargo, B of A may not notice. We're going to do it all at once and try to make it, a show out of it. So join together with others. And we're going to be building out this campaign as the next year goes on, because remember what I said about blue states and blue cities? They've all got treasurers. They all do bond issuing, all that kind of thing. Those are all excellent opportunities for them to push hard on the banks.
Okay. Next question. Sorry to bombard you with all these questions, but people have a lot of good questions. Is from Bob, who is asking, would it make sense for the California legislature and governor to enact legislation to eliminate investor-owned utilities like SDG&E, PG&E, and SoCal Edison and replace them with municipal-owned utilities?
You're asking the wrong person. My guess is that it might, because I know that some of the California municipal utilities have been doing more interesting work. I think Sacramento Municipal Utility District's kind of done a lot of interesting stuff. And everyone knows, even from a distance, that PG&E is a pretty weird operation. But I don't know whether it's the best use of time or not. I don't know whether the gain you get from it is worth what would be a huge organizing lift, because these guys are powerful forces, hard to beat. There's lots of things that are theoretically good to do. The question is, is that the best use of energy going forward? And you got to be a little tactical about that.
Okay, next question is from Erica and says, some of us have been working on this as long as you have, and the news is only getting worse on the injustices, the global harms to species, habitat, and people. How do you keep going? How do you keep hope alive?
Well, we all keep going because we're building these movements, and they haven't won, as you point out. But we're getting better at this and working harder. And what choice do we have, because clearly things will get much worse if we don't push hard. And this is the point I was trying to make at the beginning. We're really in the place now where we know what to do, and it's possible to do it. the basic task here, there's many, many parts of this problem, but the basic task is to stop burning coal and gas and oil. And we've known that for a long time, but until 10 or 12 years ago, it wasn't entirely clear what the replacement was going to be, because renewable energy was still pretty expensive. But that's what shifted in the last decade. So I wrote this piece for the New Yorker earlier this year saying, we're now at the place where it's quite logical and plausible that in the next 10 or 20 years, humans could essentially end our 200,000 year habit of setting stuff on fire. I mean, combustion has marked our species from the beginning. It's how we started cooking food so we could get big brains. The campfire was where we, developed the social bonds that mark our species. In the Industrial Revolution, burning fossil fuel gave us modernity, but we don't need it anymore. The cheapest way to power the planet is to take advantage of the fact that the good Lord hung a large ball of burning gas 93 million miles away, and now we have the wit to make full use of it. So we're at this point where it's just, on the one hand, it's exciting, and on the other hand, it's excruciating because we know what to do and we're just not doing it yet, not on the scale that's demanded. So our job is to keep catalyzing that reaction so it happens faster and faster and faster. We're not obviously going to stop global warming. Things are going to get worse before they get any better. But if we work hard, we will be leaving behind a great gift, a planet where the temperature only goes up 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees is an infinitely better place than one where the temperature goes up 3 or 4 degrees.
Thanks. Next question is from Wendy, who says, as you probably know, San Diego is a big hub for the U.S. military. What do you see as the U.S. military's role in combating climate change?
Well, the first thing to be said is the U.S. military uses a lot of fossil fuel. It's the biggest single user of fossil fuel in the world. Now, that doesn't mean as much as it sounds like, because it's still less than 1%, I think, of the planet's fossil fuel, because everybody uses a lot of fossil fuel. We just use it all over the place. But it's significant. Two, the U.S. military is the one place that Congress constantly throws money at, so they should be using some of it to be making getting serious work done on climate change, on energy efficiency. And oddly, they kind of are, because they're, as you may know, afraid of things like sea level rise. What they're really afraid of is the political instability that comes with what the UN estimates could be 1 billion climate refugees by mid-century. That creates chaos of a sort that no military could ever cope with. The trick is to take the US military and turn it from an institution whose prime role lies in protecting the oil, our access to oil around the world. It's no mystery that most of the wars we've fought in recent times have been in the Middle East, and turns it instead, in the best vision, into something that helps cope with the chaos that we're creating here and around the world as the climate changes. Look, emergency response is going to be a big part of what the world's about in years ahead. And for better or for worse, the US military is good at logistics and good at that kind of response. And one hopes to see them, see us slowly morphing, maybe quickly morphing them into a different kind of operation.
Thanks. So I'm going to try and combine two questions here, one from Mary and one that we didn't get to ask earlier. One part of it is, why aren't people more panicked about this existential crisis? And what are we doing wrong to get people's attention and motivate people to care about this issue? And Mary's question is specifically around the media. How do we get folks in the media, which I think is tied to this, to talk about the climate crisis and describe it as a dire situation that we're in?
Well, the truth is the media is doing a way better job than they used to. I mean, the first 20 years of the climate crisis, the media was a complete disaster, treated it as a he said, she said story. We're the vehicle for spreading the fossil fuel industry's disinformation campaign, on and on and on. And now, at least at the top level, places like the New York Times and the Washington Post, their coverage is really quite good. The place where it's weaker and where you should keep pressing hard is places like local TV, which people watch a lot of. And when they're covering fires and things, just keep writing them, saying you need to be talking about the fact that this is linked to climate change. You need to talk to you need to be writing the weathermen and meteorologists at the TV stations and things, and that really starts to help. That kind of pressure is paid off over time in getting people to talk more about it. So the good news is that people taken as a whole have a much stronger sense that climate change is real and that we need to do something. You're right that they haven't yet mostly taken on board the urgency of it, do not understand exactly how time linked it is and how far behind the curve we are. So those are things worth talking about, but it's hard to do them in ways that aren't completely disempowering either to people. So one way to talk about it a lot is to emphasize the excitement of how quickly we can move. You know what really polls well? Solar panels. 80% of Republicans, of independents, of Democrats want way more support for solar panels and renewable energy. So it's a powerful thing to be talking about and pushing. People get it, and we've got some room to move here.
Okay, great. I just want to say to folks, thanks everybody for the great questions that you had. We have one last question. We're not going to take any more from the audience because we need to wrap up and let Bill get on with his night soon. But we have one last question that we had put together earlier, which is how can we as individuals and local organizations be most effective in advancing climate solutions at the local level specifically? You answered some of this previously, but if there's anything you'd like to add.
You guys have written the book on this, Masada. You know how to do this at the local level. You're getting remarkable things done, and everyone's learning from you. And so, one of the things that we do a crappy job of is taking pleasure in and celebrating the victories that we get. And because that's one of the things that really helps us move on and build more power and energy. So that would be my first piece of advice. When things go right, make sure to jump up and down about it and pat each other on the back and have the proper celebration. And as we're doing this work, bring in as much of kind of that culture and that joy and whatever you can. One of the things that we're really having a good time with as we do third act is, many of the icons of our generation, my generation, are still around and kicking, and they're all willing to help. When young people start going, okay, boomer to me, I always say, okay, I get your point, I understand it, I take it. It's why we're working hard. But fight me if you want. But our generation did produce the best music there ever was. And that's why it's really fun to have, like Carole King and Neil Young and Bette Midler. And we had Mandy Patinkin on our big national call last night and things. Everybody joining in. So keep pushing like that too. Act like winners. You guys are on the ascendant here. You've got to convince people like Gavin Newsom that their future lies in doing the right thing, in moving fast ahead, in being on the vanguard. And so keep doing what you're doing, and do it in the best spirit you possibly can, because it just helps all of us all over the world. You guys are at the tip of the spear in California. You all know you're the fifth biggest economy in the world. You're Germany, and you're pushing hard in the right direction. The harder you can go, the better you can go. But it's just keep doing it and bring more and more people in with all the pleasure and joy that you can. I just, I can't say enough good about the work that you guys do. And I'm incredibly grateful for it. And lots of people are incredibly grateful for it. Just know that all over the world, all those 350 groups in every corner of the planet, 350 Pacific Climate Warriors or in Africa, they're well aware of what you guys are up to. And I know that you're well aware of what they're up to. We are a big global movement. We're up against very strong and powerful opponents. We're doing what we can, and we're winning some serious victories. We don't know whether we're going to get there in time or not. The outcome of this drama is, still up for grabs, but push, push, push. And when you're done pushing for the day, go out and enjoy the beautiful San Diego sunshine and use it as solar power to recharge your batteries for the next day. You guys have no excuse for being glum there in the most beautiful city in the country. You've got extraordinary things going on. Thank you all. And Masada, as always, thank you so much for doing what you do. It gives us all kinds of heart. So yeah, it's late here on the East Coast. I'm an old guy. I'm off to bed. But you guys stay up and keep talking. And
we have one more thing for you before you take off, Bill,
good.
Which is Marianne from North County Climate Change Alliance has an award to present you with, and then we will wrap up for real. So
all right,
Marianne?
Great.
Hi, Bill. I want to thank you so much. And I want to tell you that your message has given us all a lot of hope. And I really appreciate the way you've made yourself accessible to all of us. And we have a habit of rewarding our wonderful speakers with a tree that we purchase. And we purchased a tree for you. And it is going to be planted in an area here in California that has been burned by wildfires. So again, we want to thank you so much. And also too, I would like to acknowledge the work that Masada does down here. She is an amazing leader. And so Masada, we have also purchased a tree for you in your honor. Thank you.
I want a picture of our trees standing next to each other in the forest there. And thank you so much for all your work. And I'm going to go, I've been known on occasion to drink a beer, and I have one of those San Diego famous IPAs in the refrigerator. So I'm going to go have that as my nightcap tonight and think of you all. And on we go. And next time in person, and I'll look forward to it.
Salud.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, North County Climate Change Alliance for the trees. Much appreciated. We're going to wrap up at this point. So we want to thank Bill again for spending his time and his thoughts with us. I hope everybody's as inspired as I am. And I really want to thank, on behalf of NCCCA and SD350 people who did the organizing tonight, really want to thank everybody who came tonight for joining us and for the amazing work that each of you is doing to make this world a better place. We will have the recording to share, and also Gabriella in the chat just said that she's willing to put together a list of the resources that were in the chat so that we can send them out to everybody. So thank you, Gabriella. That's it for tonight. We'll have the recording, we'll send you more info, and in the words of Bill McKibben, act like winners and do it.